Hey guys, welcome back to Diani Speaks. It has been a few weeks, but I just took a moment away from recording YouTube content to focus my efforts towards fighting for social justice. But if you do follow me on Instagram, I have been pretty active there. Let's gather our thoughts together, shall we? I believe my journey to creating Diani Speaks began towards the end of my undergraduate studies. My senior research posed the question, does Black women's biological makeup hinder their ability to exude a professional persona in comparison to their white counterparts? Now, this ended up becoming my guide, my blueprint, my love piece, and my letter of encouragement to myself as I entered corporate America. I understood at my commencement ceremony that I would be leaving a space that promoted me being my most authentic self and transitioning into one that would seek for me to conform in an effort to mute who I was. I reference that paper quite often, more often than I thought I would need to. Every time someone was uncomfortable with my conspicuous Blackness, every time someone was questionable whether my presentation should be deemed unprofessional because the way that my hair naturally grows up instead of down, and the way that my natural curves can be deemed as sexy through a distorted lens. It is somewhat of a mind warp to sit and consider how who we are as natural beings can be deemed as a threat or unworthy of basic rights and access. I remember my mother having to constantly apply for controlled transfers to have me and my siblings go to schools in neighborhoods whose tax dollars would pay for them to have the basic necessities for a proper education. Nonetheless, I went to work with my twist outs, braid outs, cornrows, and box braids, faux locks, and froze. I could care less how it made someone else feel. I presented my most authentic self because they could not take my intellect without my truth. They could not take my productivity without my presentation. So I began operating and speaking under a hashtag Curly and Corporate. This was another love piece to myself, but also a dedication to Black and brown professionals who would be seeking to navigate corporate America while maintaining their authenticity, although everything around them was trying to dilute it. I was against code switching. I was against conforming because I knew the more that they would make me look like them, speak like them, and think like them, the less I would be me and actually present. I wouldn't be in the room anymore. I wouldn't be offering who I am. I would be lying about who I was. I think that is a part of the frustration that I've had with Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Atatiana Jefferson. Remembering how we've been taught to mute ourselves in rooms where we may be the only one, not because we're afraid to be ourselves, but more so we're concerned with making the majority uncomfortable. And that leads me to this. Recently, someone highlighted through a post on LinkedIn the scarcity of Black representation in executive leadership roles throughout corporate America. She was sure to list a few companies that had zero Black representation, but also noted that the very few that had just one was mainly in a role for diversity and inclusion officer or something of the sort. I think corporate America has misunderstood the purpose and intent of diversity and inclusion. It is not to make us comfortable in white spaces, but rather for you to make room at a table and understand that it's not just for us to say, excuse me, can I get a seat? But rather for there to be one already prepared for us to come and operate. So how did we get here? How did we end up battling a distorted Eurocentric perception of professionalism and appropriate mechanism? How did we begin raising our Black boys and girls to present themselves in ways that will make them more acceptable to the white community? How did we start silencing their essence? How did we get to the place where everything they do is being scrutinized and picked apart because it's too Black? To the point where we grow up into these professionals who must straighten their hair for an interview and cannot dare enter the workplace with facial hair, cannot dare have a fro that has any type of kink or coil. No sir, shave that down. Woman, don't come in with your braids or your weave. And certainly if you're going to do one, don't switch to the other, because you will be asked the most uncanny question of, did you cut your hair? Or does that hurt? How long does it take for it to get done? Not understanding that all these things contribute to the silent anger that we must carry. Understand that none of these concerns are mutually exclusive. Why am I talking about curly and corporate right now? Well, because we sit and we think about all of the ways we have to silence ourselves after spending a weekend repeatedly watching a video where a racist man kneels on the neck of an innocent for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And we bottle that up to enter back into those white spaces that want to behave as if none of that occurred that past week, and as if nothing just burned down in response to the years of systemic racism and the fact that we still have to sit and listen on a Zoom call and lecture to someone who is less qualified than we are. We are silenced. So how did we get here? Let's talk about it. The Jim Crow era produced a stain and a depiction of Black people that we still have to work to fight any race. Black caricatures were used to degrade and dehumanize Black people, and they still seem to seep into the constraint cognition of socioeconomic status and groupthink throughout America. Who is your Sambo? Who is your Coon? Who is your Mammy? Who is your Sapphire? My goal of Deani Speaks and Curly and Corporate is that you see yourself. That you get so comfortable seeing yourself that anytime a room, a space, a location, a vocation, a relationship, or a narrative tries to shrink or diminish you out of it, you notice it so quickly and you amplify your Blackness. Because the truth of who you are is the very thing that they benefit from. So let's take a dive into how they see us. Lord, got to get out that old line and board, fix them up. While many of these stereotypes are rooted in years prior to the Jim Crow era, the imagery that was birthed fueled the fire. These depictions are still used to categorize the type of Black person one may be viewing or encountering. The Tom and Mammy caricatures were loved by whites because they did not pose a threat. They were depicted as docile, unattractive servants who pledged loyalty to the white families they cared for, so much so that they were willing to turn on their own family and race. These two may look familiar, as their racist imagery has since evolved into the packaging of Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's products.
How would you like to go to work for me?
Yeah!
How much you gonna pay me, I hope?
Well, let's see now. I'll pay you all your worth.
No, ma'am, I gotta have some money.
The coon stereotype is one of the most actively used today. It was depicted as a young man who disrespected white people. However, his intellect fell short, so he was never taken seriously. He loved watermelon and fried chicken, slow talking, slow walking, lazy, ignorant, and obsessively self-indulgent. One of the most dangerous stereotypes that Black men consistently battle is that of the brute caricature. He was portrayed as savage, animalistic, destructive, and criminal, a fiend and a beast. In the video of George Floyd's murder, one of the officers says, "Don't do drugs, guys." The disgusting attempt to minimize the value of a Black man's life was motivated by how he saw him, as a brute, as a being deserving of punishment and death. Brutes were often depicted as ugly, terrifying predators who victimized helpless white women. They were constantly accused of rape. In 1905, racist author Thomas Dixon published a novel, The Klansman. It included the lynching of what would have been described as a brute by the KKK. The racist organization was praised, and the book was the catalyst to the film Birth of a Nation. That went on to be an even greater stain into the perception of Black people and Black lives. The Pickaninny was a child coon. They usually had dark skin, bulging eyes, wide mouths, and unkempt hair. They were often drawn being eaten by alligators or running after chicken or watermelon. They were rarely given names. They were either in tattered clothing or none at all. The nudity sexualized the children and thus normalized sexual abuse. If you've ever been thought of as the angry Black woman, you're probably being viewed through the lens of the Sapphire caricature. She was portrayed as rude, loud, malicious, stubborn, and overbearing. She is expected to be mean-spirited and abusive. But in truth, these are just ways to silence her voice as she speaks up for injustices or wrongdoings. Any mistreatment that she receives in an intimate relationship, she speaks out on. Any injustice she sees in the world, she works to correct. But instead of applauding her for the use of her voice, they instead try to weaponize it. The Jezebel caricature was used to portray Black women as sexual deviants. This helped to justify the rapings of Black women by white men. From the end of the Civil War to the mid-1960s, no Southern white male was convicted of raping or attempting to rape a Black woman, even though the crime was very common. Jezebel is promiscuous and lewd. She's likely to have a lot of children, so today she may be referred to as something like a welfare queen. A greater understanding and acknowledgement for these racist caricatures will help us to unpack how Black people are perceived and treated in this society. And if you are not Black, it will help you to understand why you carry the perceptions of us that you do. What fueled it, and what are you doing to maintain it? Once you acknowledge that, you can then work to break it.